Hello and welcome back to Truss Issues, the podcast where we track the first 100 days of Liz Truss's premiership. We didn't make it. But there wasn't 100 days to track. We were so ready. I packed my bag, we were tracking, we were ready.
It feels bad that we recorded the podcast yesterday and she immediately resigned. But then again, I feel vindicated because we did say we were going to resign. Or we said she'd be gone by the next episode.
We did, and we were right. So welcome back to the first episode of Truss Issues post-Truss. We live in a post-Truss era.
Yeah.
I suppose.
That's good.
Thank you.
Is that what the new podcast is? It post-Truss era?
No, I don't like that. I don't
we
want.
got to drop the Truss, I think.
I don't want
That's what the Tories were saying.
Yeah.
Good.
I don't want every year post-now to be marked as post-Truss.
Yeah,
I think we
that's
need to
true.
move on. Anyway, let me introduce both of you because we're started now. I'm joined as always by Ben Blissett, TLDR UK's lead writer, and for the first time you got Rory and me on the same podcast.
It's
this
rare.
is
Very
Rory
rare
Taylor,
appearance.
TLDR's social media coordinator.
Do you want to explain the beers?
I do. Video viewers will have noticed there are beers on the table. Audio viewers might have just sensed the beers. You certainly will sense the beers by the end. A couple weeks ago, we were number 10 on the UK podcast charts for politics or news or both
Politics.
maybe.
It was just politics.
Anyway, we were number 10. And I said that for every one we made it up the chart, we would drink a beer in a future podcast. Today is that podcast. We got to 8. We are now lower than that.
20th.
Let's not worry about
We should be
numbers.
handing out pints to people.
We should be drinking 10 pints of water to balance it. But we said the highest we got, that's what we drink. So we got to 8. So we're having 2 pints on today's show.
Yeah.
And if you're watching along and of legal age, why not join in?
Are you allowed to say that?
I don't know
Probably.
if you're allowed to
Why?
say that.
Yeah. Why
I mean,
not?
the legal age thing.
I said, why
suppose.
not?
Yeah.
No, I'm not saying you have to. Why
Yeah.
not? Think about it.
I thought
We
we were
get
going to have the
cancelled.
first sip together, but Ben went straight in as soon as you brought up the
Rory,
beer. So
cheers. Oh, I'm dripping on Ben's notes.
Oh, this is already I've
The
got
profession.
alcohol stained.
Okay, so since we last spoke,
Cold.
sorry,
It's cold.
that's good.
Good,
That's what you want. Since we last spoke yesterday, Liz Truss has left number 10. Well,
Yes.
she's still in number 10,
She's got
but she's.
maybe a week or
Yeah.
less.
Do you reckon she's got the movers ready? That's a quick turnaround. Normally
Yeah.
a lot longer than that. Anyway, she is no longer properly Prime Minister. She's still acting as Prime Minister, but she has resigned. That took a long time to get to that point, considering that's the point that everyone already knew. So now, the Conservatives are looking for a new leader for the 100th time this year.
Feels
Is
Yeah,
that right?
it feels
Yeah.
like it.
Yeah.
Definitely feels like it.
Run the stats on that afterwards, but I
Yeah.
think it's 100. So they're looking for a new leader. We vaguely know who the people are going to be because we only just did this.
Yeah.
We vaguely know who's popular and not because we just did this, and we vaguely know what they stand for because we just did this. But before we get to the candidates and we get to the specifics of who could be in number 10, could Boris be coming back? Before we get to that, Ben, you want to quickly run us through the process of how we're going to get there, starting with the nominations.
Yeah, so the Tory party leadership election is working a little bit different this time. They're working on a collapsed timescale. So previously this year when we had the summer leadership election, as I suppose we should start referring to it as,
Yes.
they needed,
Oh, that is annoying, isn't it?
they needed 30 MPs
Yeah.
to be nominated. And then this time they need 100 MPs. Now, there were 357 Tory MPs.
Okay.
So the maximum you can have going through from the nominations on Monday are 3.
So that's a massive increase. We've gone from needing
30
backers to needing 100 backers. What is the reasoning behind that? Why has the threshold been lifted so high?
Well, it's basically because they are working on a collapsed timescale.
Okay.
If you had 30, you'd have a lot more MPs going through.
Which is what we saw.
Which
in
is
the
what we
summer.
saw last time. Then they had multiple rounds. They're aiming to have as few MP rounds as possible here. So the expectation is probably 2 will go through. Could be 1, could be 3, but I think most likely it's probably 2.
So with 357 MPs requiring 100, it's at least theoretically possible that only one candidate meets the threshold. In that case, Rory, what would happen?
In that case, that one person would win by default and become leader of the Tory party and Prime Minister. It would be what is referred to as a coronation, which maybe we shouldn't say that now that we do have an actual coronation coming up. But So that we would know that on Monday.
Yeah.
And it would mean we'd get the new Prime Minister Monday or Tuesday rather than having to wait till Friday.
Which would be wild.
Yeah.
Truss probably ought to start packing her boxes now just in
Just
case.
in case.
You don't want to have to move out that quickly.
Exactly.
So, presuming that doesn't happen, because if that does happen, that's kind of crazy because MPs will have got a say, but no one else will have done.
Yeah.
Not the country, not membership, just MPs. Presuming there are at least 2 candidates that make it through, 2 or 3, then what happens? Who gets a voice at that point?
So if there's 3, there'll be the MPs vote to whittle it down to 2. The person who has the least votes
Very
in that
quick
round will
whittle
go,
from 3 to 2.
Exactly.
We had a big old whittle in the summer. This is a tiny whittle.
Yeah. So it would go from 3 to 2. And if there were just 2, then you obviously wouldn't have that first whittling down round.
Yes.
Once you get to 2...
And sorry, with the whittle.
Oh, yes.
The whittle is the top 2 go through. There's
sure
no
I like
further
whittle.
requirement.
Yeah, that's it.
It's just the loser of the whittle
Is out.
is whittled
And the
out.
top 2
And
are
they're
through.
whittled in.
Yeah.
Lovely.
And then those top 2, there will be one, what's the word they use? Indicative vote?
Indicative,
Yeah,
yes.
one indicative vote of Tory MPs
Yeah.
voting for either of those 2, just to give a sense of who the Tory parliamentary party are backing.
So that obviously we'd have some idea from the first whittling,
Yeah.
but once we'd whittled the third place out,
Yeah.
those whittlers would then get another shot at the whittle to reassign their votes to one of the top 2, which will give
Yeah.
us
I
a
love how
better
much
indication.
clearer you're making this.
Which will give us
Yeah.
a better indication of, with the whittles, we
Yeah.
get a better idea of which whittle they want. Correct?
Yeah. I think so.
Yes.
Assuming I
I don't
understand
know
your
what
use of
you
the
were
word
saying.
whittle. It's
I
both
don't
a
even
noun
know
and
what
a
you were
verb.
saying.
But yeah, basically it just gives us an idea of who the MPs want.
Yes.
Which
could impact.
which will definitely be interesting, but it also could cause even more trouble if the membership go a different way.
Yeah,
I mean,
Come on to
very
that.
simply, they get down to 2 MPs.
How could it be more simple? Did you hear my explanation? What?
I just want to make this very
We're
clear
in the same
for
room, right?
listeners and viewers, which is that you once. So on Monday you get up to 3 people, MPs getting through, up to 3 candidates getting through.
Yeah.
That's brought down to 2 following
Yeah.
another vote, and at the very end, the MPs actually vote on those 2, just to give the membership an idea of
indication.
the support.
Okay.
Hence indicative.
Which is important too, because the big issue that the new Prime Minister will have, or one of them, they've got
Yeah.
many, is bringing the party a bit more together again. Because realistically, they can't bring it totally together, but they want to unify as much as they can.
Yeah.
And if the membership end up choosing someone who doesn't even have majority support going in, that task is a lot harder. So that indicative vote could end up being indicative.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about whittling a lot, but realistically, the most likely outcome is that no more than 2 will go through, right? Because
Correct.
I
if
think so.
we've got 357 voters to get them each in 100,
Yeah.
like you've barely got margin for error there. So it's unlikely the whittle will happen. It'd be disappointing because I think everyone's
It would be
Really
nice to have
ready
a
for
vote,
whittling.
I
So
think.
there'll only
Yeah.
be one, just to be clear,
Yeah.
to people who don't understand your usage of the phrase whittle, it's
if,
likely...
if someone's confused by whittle, they've tuned out
Yeah.
by now.
It's likely that we will only have one round. There will be 2 candidates who get more than 100 MPs backing them, and that's it.
Okay, so if 2 candidates make it through,
Yes.
there's no whittle.
No.
But do we still have an indicative vote? Do
Yes.
the members still will get an indication of who the MPs prefer?
Yes.
Great. Though, to be fair, if there's only 2 members, we should roughly know who the more popular
Yeah.
one is anyway, because
Yeah. Based on
people make
nominations.
spreadsheets.
Well, actually, good point. I've said yes definitively there, but if there are only 2... No, I would expect so.
You still should.
Yeah.
Yes.
If not, we recommend it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Until
would,
we ask the
I would
other
be very
Graham
surprised
Brady's
if not.
watching.
Yeah.
He is.
Do it.
We know
Yeah.
he is.
Yeah.
Okay, so MPs get to choose. Regardless of whittle or no whittle, we'll have... I was about to say whittle or no whittle, we'll definitely have 2. That's not true. We could just have 1. We could have the coronation, but let's ignore that for the moment because for our purposes, that's the boring outcome.
Yeah.
Assuming we get down to 2, whether it's whittled, whether it's not whittled, then what happens? Who is deciding post-whittle who gets through?
The membership.
Yeah.
The membership
Tens of
being
thousands of
Conservative Party members.
Conservative Party members, yeah.
And
So
that's
they
anyone
are-
who's paying £25 a month
And has been a
and
member-
has a card.
And has been a member for more than a month.
I think it was
And
more than a month.
3
wasn't
months,
it?
I think.
Yeah, something like that.
Oh,
I think it's 3
one,
months.
okay,
Yeah.
3.
Though you can be a tortoise apparently and still get through, but
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll come to that later. So Conservative Party members will vote,
Yes.
but in theory, because it's kind of a truncated process, they're only going to be voting throughout the duration of next week.
They'll have
opening
4 days,
Monday, closing Friday.
We
5
don't
days.
we don't know that yet though.
We think that.
Yes, it could be Tuesday.
Either
it's
way,
going to
it'll
be the duration of next week.
Yes. But the point is, between Tuesday and Friday, they can vote. It's likely to be an online-only vote, and we'll probably get the results over the weekend.
Yeah.
So voting will close on Friday, and we'll probably get the results over the weekend.
I don't.
So no matter,
I don't think that's
as long as
the
there are
case.
2 or 3,
I'm pretty sure we'll get the result on Friday.
we could get it on Friday. It's complete. We don't.
I'm
we
sure.
don't-
Oh, I thought Graham Brady said we will have a winner by Friday or something like that.
I suppose you would technically have a
true.
winner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
see.
it's
yeah.
He's got you there, grammar.
Very clever.
It's a
Yeah.
suggestion that it will either be Friday or over
Yeah.
the weekend. But the point is, voting will happen through next week. Well,
Yeah.
The results will be announced very swiftly after, whether that's Friday afternoon, Saturday, Sunday. We
Yeah.
don't know yet, but it's going to be one of those.
Yeah.
And then we presume the following week they'll probably go to the King to go and become the next Prime Minister. So it's a very, very short process.
So-
and it also makes you wonder, almost makes you wonder why we had such a very long
Wow.
leadership election over the summer.
Cynicism, Ben. We can't
Um,
cope. So, regardless, at
can
earliest, we'll have a new Prime Minister by beginning of next week if we have the coronation model
Yes.
that Rory explained. The slowest is potentially beginning of the week after. Regardless, we're going to have a new Prime Minister very soon. The Conservatives said the other day they want the new Prime Minister in place before the fiscal statement
Which
on
is
Halloween.
Halloween.
Tuesday.
Which can we just? I don't think we've said this before. What terrible optics! Why are you
Yeah.
having a Halloween? Like, you're literally writing the headlines.
It is
for
a headline
Harry-
writer's dream, isn't it?
Harry Cole of The Sun, who's the editor of
Yeah.
The Sun, came out and said, on the behalf of tabloid editors everywhere, thank you, as in
It's
for making it on
crazy.
Halloween. Yeah, it's going to be, you're going to have all sorts of front pages on Halloween about the
I'm
fiscal
sure you are.
statement.
Okay, before we move on to who's likely to succeed through the whittling, let's quickly talk about the online aspect of this. So previously, how did the vote work over the summer? What was the process over the summer? Was it a similar online system but slower, or was it entirely different?
For the Tory members over the summer, they had an option of voting by post or online.
Yeah.
I think the length of time was to allow postal votes to go in, and also to allow a period of campaigning. Whereas the next week of just online votes is there's not going to be much time for campaigning. I think they said there'll be one. They called it a broadcast event, so effectively a TV debate.
Sure.
There'll be enough time for that, but so it'll be a week of voting online this time, no postal votes. And over the summer, there was this issue of security relating to the online vote, which
GCHQ stepped in.
Yeah. So now that it's just an online vote, it kind of raises the stakes even more. So you really hope they will.
I mean,
make it
as well,
secure.
because this new Prime Minister, presuming it's not Boris Johnson, which is a possibility, doesn't really have a mandate of their own by any definition. They will have been brought in by Conservative MPs and potentially, depending on the process, Conservative members, but you're still talking about a very small segment of the electorate.
Yeah.
And we can have an argument, and we will likely have an argument around whether that's legitimate, especially 3 prime ministers removed from, or 2 prime ministers removed from the one who last got elected, presuming it's not Boris again. We'll likely have arguments whether that's legitimate. Obviously, Gordon Brown got criticism when he took over that he wasn't legitimate. Theresa May, same thing.
But they were only one prime minister removed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so this is clearly an escalation of that, and there may be calls for a general election regardless, but especially because we've got this kind of added confusion. It's rapid, it's online. I think the demand for that could be even higher because the legitimacy does seem slightly more questionable.
There's also the very real possibility that the members don't get a say next week.
Yes.
It's a very real possibility that on Monday only one candidate gets over 100 MP nominations, and they will just by default become the next prime minister.
I think the Conservative Party, probably secretly wants that to
Yes,
happen.
that would be
And
better
I think
for them.
everyone who's not in the Conservative Party possibly wants that to happen.
I think it's important to note that this isn't the standard way that Tory party leadership elections work. They have clearly drawn these rules up specifically, and they've done that in such a way to serve their own ends, and those ends being that they, as you've both said, it's probably because they don't really want it to go to membership.
They don't really want to go to the membership, partly because last time it didn't go down that well. Conservative MPs wanted Sunak broadly.
Yeah.
and Conservative members voted Truss. And whatever mitigating factors you want to say Truss had other issues, Putin's illegal war in Ukraine, etc. She clearly didn't do the job that MPs necessarily wanted her to. So you can see why they might want to take power out of their hands. But beyond that as well, surely they're hoping to draw a line under this, to have a more unified front going forward, and having, whether it's one broadcast event or 2 or 10 or whatever, they don't want more blue on blue fighting in the next few days ahead of a new prime minister who's trying to pull the party together.
Precisely.
So from an optics perspective, clearly better to have one person on Monday.
Yeah.
Okay, so on the online voting again, sorry, just to circle back quickly. There was obviously the concern from GCHQ, even on the extended timeline. They actually delayed voting over the summer as well.
We got the results at the same time, but I think they
kept the voting open.
Yeah, they kept it open longer, but yeah.
So we've got that concern. We've also got, Truss, who are an online kind of news agency, they reportedly registered a tortoise to vote, made up British person with Margaret Thatcher's maiden name and an American. They registered all of those to be Conservative Party members, and were they able to actually vote, or did they just become members?
Because they did that thing late,
Yeah.
outside the threshold of when you needed to join to be able to vote, they couldn't vote. But obviously, had they done that a few months in advance, they would have been able to vote.
So there's clearly concerns around the security of this system, and especially in the climate we're in right now, you can see there's people who might want to meddle in this. I mean, obviously, you've got a limited palette of options. It's not like they're going to elect Boaty McBoatface. They've got kind of 2 choices.
Yeah.
But there is clearly a concern there with the online element that potentially there could be some interference, either foreign or domestic. Either way, we'll see whether we get down to that level of whittling.
Yeah.
But let's move on from the system itself, because we've been talking for a while, and what people want is names, faces, and politics.
Yeah.
So, do we want to run through the people who are most likely to become Prime Minister at this stage?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So, ultimately, there are only really 3 names here. You know, over summer, we had a number of names. We had like Suella Braverman, Kemi Badenoch, people like that. There was even Raymond Chisty.
Yay! We said it in sync too.
Exactly. Who, also known as who? So there was
some old material there.
Just for viewers, I've made this joke in the office a few times. Anyway, so there was a lot of candidates, some of which weren't as well known.
Yeah.
This time round, there is only really 3.
Okay.
And that is Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson, Penny Mordaunt.
Okay.
They are the 3. So far, it seems that Rishi Sunak is yet again ahead in terms of the
He was
numbers,
last time too,
numbers
though,
of support.
So
To be clear, it is only Friday. He's got the weekend to canvass
and
and
also
Monday.
actually, none of these 3. Well, no one has actually announced as an official candidate yet.
Yes.
No.
So
and the maximum,
we can presume that those 3 probably will. I think.
I mean, if they reach the threshold,
yeah, why wouldn't they?
Why wouldn't
Yeah.
you? Well, the other thing to note is that obviously it is only Friday afternoon. The maximum any of them have, which is Rishi Sunak, it's only just over 50. So they're not actually close to the threshold
as we
yet.
sit here right now, it's 56 for Sunak.
Yes.
At least according to this printout in front of me. So this could already be out of date as we record.
Yes.
Who knows? But so he's just over half. Johnson sitting at 40 and Mordaunt at 16. So Sunak has the lead at the moment, but he did during the whole campaign last time and didn't get it.
So this is what's important here.
Yeah.
If Rishi Sunak is trying to win by being the only person to surpass 100, this is relevant. This is relevant that he is ahead, and he could potentially be. So from my perspective, I think that there are 2 likely options. Sunak is the only person to get over 100.
Yeah.
And if these numbers matter, if that's the case. The other option is that I think Johnson also gets over 100, and then it's a member vote. But if that goes to the membership, I think that it's very likely that Johnson will beat Sunak.
Okay.
But I don't know. I think they're both. I would say that they're at 50-50, whether Sunak gets outright 100 and he's the only one to get 100 on Monday and becomes the Prime Minister, or it's that Johnson and Sunak get over 100 and then there's a member vote, and then I think Johnson wins. I think both of those eventualities, I can't
Quite
say
possible.
which are more likely.
I'm going to make you make an overall guess at the end, obviously, because we love clipping moments to hold against you. But Rory, what do you think the most like for these 3 candidates? They're sat at 56, 40 and 16 respectively. On Monday, what do you think the most likely outcome is? Will we have 1 candidate, 2 candidates, 3 candidates?
I think we'll probably have 2.
Those being
Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, assuming that the three we talk about actually want to run.
Of course.
I think with Penny Mordaunt, I think she is more likely to try and gather as many names as possible, but obviously she's quite a way behind the other two. So I think she's more likely to try and, behind the scenes, come to a deal with, I would assume, Rishi Sunak. I see her aligning more with Rishi Sunak than Boris Johnson, but I might be completely wrong.
No, I think you're absolutely right on that.
Yeah, so I think it would be Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson, or like Ben said. Basically, I kind of agree with Ben. I was going a roundabout way of saying it, but
you don't want to admit to it too quickly.
But I mean, if it was Boris Johnson v Rishi Sunak, that's a proper grudge match, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like it would be brutal, and there's no chance that one of them would drop out.
No, there's a lot of history there as well. And just to be clear, Boris Johnson backers, I mean, Nadine Dorries seemed absolutely furious at Rishi Sunak. They are furious at the fact that they feel like he was the person who stabbed Johnson in the back to cause him to fall and for Liz Truss to then
which I think is giving Sunak a bit too much credit. He was certainly part.
I think he was one of the biggest.
He was one of the biggest.
But Sajid Javid did it before him.
Let's give Johnson credit. He did quite a lot of it himself.
Of course, Sajid Javid also did it at the same time. But Sunak was the Chancellor. I think that's what gave it weight. I do sort of understand. I think. Look, all I'm saying is that I think that Sunak probably was the most instrumental part in what caused the downfall of Johnson. So I
think Boris Johnson was.
Well, if you're if you're not counting Johnson and all of his scandals, and if we're just naming other individuals, I would say that Sunak is the top of that.
He sparked it all.
Really. He was the spark. Okay. So I can understand.
So same question I posed to Rory: 1, 2, or 3 on Monday, and who would those 1, 2, or 3 be?
I don't think there will be 3.
You think there'll be
2?
No, 2 and.
I think
Rishi and Johnson. Okay, so let's talk about that pairing. You've got some notes here that I imagine you want to read out. This is your opportunity to do so.
About the possibilities.
About the matchup.
So there's a lot to discuss here. So firstly, I think that let's just go through the possibility of it being Boris versus Rishi,
which you both think is the most likely.
Which I think is tied as the most likely as Rishi just winning outright. But Rishi winning outright, there's not much to say. Yeah. He's probably he would just become leader on Monday.
Yeah.
If it is Boris versus Rishi, you've got to try and get into the mindset, firstly, of Conservative MPs. Like, what do they think that this would mean for the party? For each of those. So Boris, if we go back to Boris, one of the things is that he's the only person, and this is what Nadine Dorries has been saying on Twitter all week, which is that he's the only person with a mandate.
Yeah.
He's the only person with a mandate from the British people.
Which is true.
He won the election. There's a lot here. He won 365 seats in the 2019 election. He got 43.6 to Labour's 32.1%.
Yeah.
There's a 1.2% swing in favour of the Tories and a negative 7.9% swing for Labour.
Yeah.
He won, and just bear in mind in 2019 as well that there was all the Brexit stuff going on.
Yeah.
There was Theresa May. She called an election in 2017 and reduced the seat numbers. It looked like, and we'd had a coalition for 5 years between 2010 and 2015, and then there was a majority, but only a very slim majority for David Cameron between 15 and 17, which Theresa May also used. He won the first sort of Tory majority, big Tory majority, really, for a number of decades. That was huge for him. So some Tory MPs will be looking at that and going, he could win. And that's really important as well, because the Tories are behind in the polls at the minute. A couple of weeks ago, we saw that the Tories were sort of like 33 points behind in the polls. They're now, Retfield Wilson is now saying that they're 36 points behind.
Huge.
Which is massive. And they're saying that the trust in the Conservatives on the economy, which is, basically one of their main things. Only 15% say that they would trust the Tories with the economy,
which is wild.
To 43% for Labour, which is massive. That's
the wrong way around normally.
Yeah, exactly. So they might be looking at those polling and going, Johnson has won as an election. He could turn this around. So that's one way of looking at this.
Before you do the other side of this.
Yes.
So the logic there is 2019 was very successful. He's got a proven track record when it comes to winning elections. He's been Prime Minister before. No one else has been on this list.
Yeah.
That's a good or bad thing, depending on how you look at it. His premiership wasn't exactly scandal-free, as I'm sure we'll come on to. But he's got more of a track record than anyone else. The question I have when it comes to those kind of the pros for Johnson My question there is, does that still hold though? He was pitched against a Labour Party who was struggling at the time, let's say. They'd done relatively well in 2017, but between 17 and 19 had lost some steam. Corbyn at that point was no longer the strongest opposition, really. So while Johnson did well in that instance, he did very well. Like, I'm not trying to take anything away from that. But my question is, matched up against Starmer, with all of the additional baggage he picked up between 2019 and 2022, does he still hold these as really big advantages and really big leverage? Or is this a thing of the past that's being held up?
So obviously Starmer was ahead in the polls, specifically as well, sort of after Partygate. But the point is that it took quite a lot for Starmer to be ahead, and those polling numbers were not the numbers we're seeing currently.
Yes.
So yes, there are more questions as to the Labour Party is more united, their leader is more popular with the public, there is more suggestion that Labour could win the next election.
Yeah.
But the point is that he is a proven.
Yeah.
He has won an election, he's done a campaign, he's got a team behind him, and in times of crisis, people tend to go to the nose.
He also has the ability to draw a line under what Truss has done. He can say, "Well, return back to me." Sure,
that was just a weird blip.
Sure, I had a cake. I was kicked out because of a party. Whatever. He can hope people have forgotten about that. COVID was long enough ago now that I think people on the left can stir up a certain amount of anger, but how much they can reignite that is questionable. He can draw a line under and say, hey, Tories, you should regret ever getting rid of me. I'm back. That was different.
Yeah.
I'm here again. Do you think that stands, Rory?
Well, I was
or do you
going to
think
say,
he has...
The Tories have... There's almost like a myth, I think, of Boris Johnson as an election winner. And obviously, that comes from the fact that he did win an election.
He did it, yeah.
And he won London twice to become mayor. But you only have to look at the recent by-elections that happened under Boris Johnson to see that actually the Tories lost huge ground there. Chesham and Amersham, Wakefield, Tiverton and Honiton, North Shropshire. These were some of those were majorities of 25,000-ish votes, and they lost them under Boris Johnson.
And this ultimately was part of his downfall. It wasn't his biggest issue by any means, but part of the narrative that strung together was he's got all of these scandals. It probably will lose us elections in the future. And look, it's already losing us by-elections.
So there's a few things. I do agree, and I take the point. I'm just going to sort of play devil's advocate here. Their argument would be a few things. Number one is that those elections were held while the scandals were still fresh.
True.
So that probably helped opposition parties. The second point is that they weren't in election season, which means that they didn't have the Tory election machine whirring and producing, all kinds of leaflets, things like that help the Tories and campaigning, etc., etc. So they were held at sort of opportune times for opposition parties. But I do completely take your point that they did exceptionally badly nonetheless, and they did lose these huge, as you say, these weren't seats with small majorities.
Yeah, these weren't ones they should lose.
These were ones they shouldn't even lose given those circumstances. Yeah. They should still have been quite big.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of the case for Johnson.
Yeah.
Before we get to the case against Johnson, let's take a short break. We have to have another pint as per the rules.
Yeah.
So we'll be back in no time.
No time for the audience.
For us.
Yeah.
We'll fast forward through this. For the video viewers, get some music, get a fast forward montage of us poorly pouring pints.
Yeah. Are we going to bring them in here?
And we'll be back in a second.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, welcome back to Truss Issues. I'm still joined by Ben Blissett and Rory Taylor.
Yeah.
Second pint. You ready?
Ready.
Second half.
Second half.
It's going to be
pint.
better half, right? Better half. Better
pint. It just gets better. Yeah.
Okay, so that was kind of the case for Boris Johnson. We just set out there. He's an election winner. He has a mandate. He has been Prime Minister before, for better or worse.
He's got a lot of MP back. We didn't really mention this, but he has a lot of MPs backing him as well. There's a huge swathe of the... not maybe a huge...
But there might not be 100.
Yeah, there are some.
There is some.
Yeah.
One very keen.
Very Nadini.
Ooh. Okay, so
Backer.
that's kind of the case for Johnson.
Yeah.
Do you want to run through the case against? Because bringing back a former prime minister in this manner is entirely unprecedented. So what are we looking at as why they shouldn't?
Well, let's just remind ourselves as to why he left. It was
Okay.
because he was absolutely doused in scandal. He was just dripping in Westminster scandal of a huge kind. So these are just some of the scandals that Johnson had to face during his premiership.
Go for it.
He had the prorogation scandal, where he was found to have unlawfully advised the Queen.
Classic.
The Jennifer Arcuri scandal, where he didn't declare that he was having an affair with an American businesswoman who
Not a
got
good
contracts when he was the mayor of London. The Barnard Castle scandal, which was Dominic Cummings breaking lockdown rules.
Also
the
not a good
PPE
look.
contract scandal, which was the government giving contracts to, mates of Tory MPs.
Bit messy.
The Partygate scandal. Don't need to go into that one.
Bit of
The
cake.
scandal over his flat refurbishment,
Too much
which
wallpaper.
was, that was quite large. And, the funny thing is that happened, and then he just had to leave right after that. The Owen Paterson scandal.
I'm not making a comment.
And then there were scandals over him misleading Parliament, which are still going through Parliament. And then
Very
a whole
scary.
host of sex scandals, which ranges from MPs watching porn in the House of Commons
It was tractors.
to serious sexual offences by Tory MPs.
No comment.
So, did you have fun there, Jack?
I did not. There were a couple of ones I didn't expect when I was reading down the bullet point. I wouldn't have started that game
To be
otherwise.
fair to Boris, though, we all make mistakes, don't we? So it's
True.
yeah. Who amongst us hasn't done all of those things?
I've looked at tractors. I've given multi-million-pound contracts to
Yeah.
friends, and I have, as I said, driven to Barnard Castle,
Yeah.
but I can't drive, so
There you go.
Yeah, that's
I'm off
true.
the hook for that one.
No,
So-
Jack just got a train in lockdown to Barnard Castle.
Is there a train station there?
I honestly don't know. Durham, I guess.
Must be.
Surely get an Uber. Could you get Ubers during
Not
COVID?
there.
Not
Oh,
out
sorry.
there. Very true. That Barnard Castle feels
Yeah.
like one of the places you'd arrive in. You'd be like, oh, let's get an Uber there. You open the app.
I have driven past
You've
it
not
before,
got
but,
shit.
yeah.
Nothing.
So we derailed that slightly.
I think the beers
there's
aren't
yeah, there's a lot of scandals. He resigned amid a lot of scandals, and
Yeah.
that suggests he shouldn't come back, basically.
We could add to the list, though. That's a fun list to read
Yeah.
through. And if he came back for a couple of years, general election live stream 2024,
Maybe even more.
got a massive list.
I just want to add on.
Ben could have a scroll that he drops and it goes.
Yeah.
That would be fun.
That would be
like
fun.
An archaic sort of scroll.
See, we've run through the list of scandals, and clearly there's a number there. And if you were to be re-elected prime minister, this list is only going to get longer. But it's kind of not like these issues have gone away. The public is still aware of these. Some of these are still very active in the public consciousness. One kind of more than any other. That's the kind of scandal around him lying to Parliament, which not only continues to be a prescient issue, but also is still being investigated in the Commons. So what's kind of the timeline around that? Because that could really undo him if he were to come back.
Okay, so basically, the timeline is in November, this Privileges Committee investigation is going to kick off. It's expected to last around 3 weeks and is going to look into whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament about the Partygate comments made in 2021.
Yeah.
He basically claimed that he didn't have any knowledge of them. They're allowing people to come forward anonymously to share evidence with the committee
Yeah.
to suggest that, perhaps he did have some knowledge beforehand that was going on. They're not using beyond reasonable doubt, which
Okay.
is the sort of criminal line for being proven guilty, effectively.
Sure.
They're going to do on the balance of probability. So if on the balance of probability they believe that he did have information and he did know that parties were happening, then when he said that he didn't, that means he misled the House.
Are they they're trying to establish that he knowingly misled Parliament,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That's the really difficult part,
Yes.
is that
Knowingly,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. So exactly. If they find that he has knowingly misled Parliament, then that gets him into basically a sticky situation.
Yeah.
Because
So what happens if the verdict is he not only did it accidentally, it wasn't just it was next door, I'm in the building, but I was upstairs. What's the deal if we find out he knowingly misled?
So if he knowingly misled Parliament,
Mhm.
then they decide on the punishment themselves. We don't know what that's going to be.
Okay.
It's up to them. But what they can do is suspend him from the House of Commons for a number of days.
Okay.
Now, if the
Which
decision, yes,
It's just contra any prime minister beyond whatever consequence you're about to say. A prime minister being suspended from the House, huge on its own, right?
yeah, absolutely. But there's a possibility that it could get even worse for him.
Beyond huge.
Beyond
Massive.
huge. Yes.
Massive, bigger than huge?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, keep going.
So that is that if they decide that the punishment is that he's suspended for more than 10 working days, which is the equivalent of 14 days, then
Unless there's a bank holiday.
Unless there's bank holiday. Very good point.
Good interjection there.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah. Then this could trigger a recall election.
If he's suspended for more than 10 days, his constituents from
Uxbridge and South Ruislip
can do what?
Can sign a recall petition. If more than 10% of them do so, then there will be a by-election in his constituency. It's important to note that he is able to stand in that.
Yeah.
But, it's a by-election. And polling currently suggests that Labour are ahead in that constituency.
Wow.
Which means that the sitting Prime Minister at that point
could
lose their seat.
What happens then?
Well, if that happens then... so, firstly, it's only by convention that the Prime Minister is a sitting member of the House of Commons. So he could still remain Prime Minister. But just as a bloke. But that is huge, and that means that he can't
turn up in the House of Commons.
Can't turn up in the House of Commons and can't do things that
I like
are
the idea of him
associated
showing up on BBC News and it's Boris
with
Johnson,
being Prime Minister.
Bloke.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The last time this actually happened, interestingly, Alec Douglas-Hume in 1963, who was a sitting member of the House of Lords, not a sitting member of the House of Commons, when he became Prime Minister, he had to resign from the House of Lords and then basically stood in a by-election and was elected to the House of Commons to become Prime Minister. So
fun fact.
The last time this happened was 1963.
So
which is a long time ago.
If Boris Johnson... I mean, there's a lot of ifs in this. If Boris Johnson becomes Prime Minister again, if he misleads Parliament and he ends up being kicked out, whatever, you get the point.
We're so far down this decision tree.
Do you think that the party will parachute him into a safe seat for a by-election, getting back in the House of Commons?
There's speculation that Boris Johnson superfan Nadine Dorries,
of course,
could potentially stand down in her constituency.
She's going in for Lords anyway,
so that she can be appointed to the House of Lords, and then Johnson could run in her constituency,
which is a safer seat.
Which is a much safer.
Yeah.
That's a good seat.
I think her seat is.
So a much safer seat. So that is right. So he'll basically pay her off by giving her a peerage, going to the House of Lords. He'll then just take her seat, which is safer than Uxbridge and South Ruislip.
It's also worth saying that even if he doesn't win this, if he doesn't become Prime Minister again, all of this could still happen. He could still be.
He could still be kicked out of by-election.
Absolutely, yeah.
But being Prime Minister, it would be a big deal. 10 times larger.
Okay,
it would be massive, Rory, which is bigger than larger.
It's bigger than large, yeah.
That's contentious in itself. I'm not sure you can say that.
I'm sure there's a. It doesn't matter.
Go on.
There's what's that show? Is it Brass Eye? Yeah, there's a Brass Eye thing about it's bigger than large.
Referencing it.
It's bigger than I can't remember what it is. I'll just embarrass myself.
It's bigger than big. It's large or something like that. Yeah. Great show.
Isn't it great when a couple of white guys get around the table and half quote a TV show?
Yeah.
Isn't that just the most exciting thing?
We want to do Peep Show. We can do Peep Show.
Oh, we could do Peep Show.
No. Okay, so.
For none, Jeremy.
Stop it. So, those are the pros and cons of Johnson. Pros, he's got a mandate. He's got a track record. He's won elections.
Yes.
Cons, dripping in scandal. And one of those scandals, dripping in scandal, which means he's broadly unpopular with the wider electorate, still pretty popular with the Conservative base, but wider electorate, he's going to struggle. Admittedly, against a Labour this strong, everyone's not got great odds, but he's going to struggle as well. More specifically, the investigation in the Commons, which, as you said, has the slightly lower bounds of the not beyond the reasonable doubt, instead on the balance of probabilities. So it's not impossible he could be found guilty by the Commons investigation, in which case he could face by-election, in which he could lose. Now, that is 15 coulds in a row, but even still, that's a pretty solid base of cons.
It would be a risk to
It's a risk.
Put him in.
Yeah.
And it's probably the greatest risk of general election, right?
Yes. So
the other two options, Mordaunt and Sunak, have their own risks. We're going through Johnson specifically because he's a former Prime Minister and that's more interesting. But the other two also have their own risks. It's just that his risks could lead to a general election, which right now would be pretty catastrophic.
So it's really difficult with the general election because basically you need the Conservative Party to agree to it. That is the only way that an election could be held. Ben Walker...
It went up my nose. It really feels like I died.
Have you drunk beer before?
Do you remember when you jump in a pool as a kid and it goes right up your nose?
Don't do that.
I need like a little... What are those clips called?
What is going on?
I've got no jump point. Just keep going.
No, this is. We're in
That's
the
being
tail
cut.
end of
That
the
is
podcast.
being cut. You can't
we're
keep
not.
that in.
We're keeping it in.
You can't keep it in.
Watch me.
Also, these chairs are so squeaky. They're definitely being picked up.
I don't know where we were. Where were
I've
we?
moved back quite a lot.
Election. Desperately.
You
trying
said
to
Ben
keep
Walker.
professional.
You said Ben Walker, but
Yes.
someone
So
said Ben Walker.
So Ben Walker of Britain Elects and the New Statesman has
Yep.
basically laid out one possible scenario that could see a general election.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's really hard for a general election to actually happen without the Conservatives, consent to it.
Of course.
They need that. It
Mhm.
either has to be the Prime Minister calls one, just on their own back,
Yeah.
or Parliament needs to agree to it. Parliament is composed currently of more than 50% of them are Tory MPs.
Yeah.
So some Tory MPs would need to vote with it. So that's really difficult. But one possibility to get a general election, according to Ben Walker, is that Sunak wins the MP vote.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the early stages. So he gets more in the indicative vote. But Johnson also goes to the membership. So it's a Rishi v. Boris
Mm-hmm.
vote. But Rishi has been proved to be more popular with the MPs.
Sure.
Johnson then wins and becomes Prime Minister again
Yep.
on the membership vote.
Mm-hmm.
A number of MPs then leave the party because they say that they don't like Johnson being Prime Minister again.
Yeah.
And then there's a budget that Johnson introduces, which is really controversial.
Sure.
Conservative members and newly independent members, because they've left the Conservative Party,
Yeah.
vote against the budget, and the government lose.
Yeah.
They lose a confidence matter, and therefore the government falls and there's a general election. That is the idea. But that is a possible scenario,
I was about
not
to say,
likely.
there's
I was
so
gonna say
many
huge
ifs
if
in
true
there.
but
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot. The thing is, I mean, that,
So which
that
parts
scenario-
do you
But
disagree with?
equally, that scenario is one of many other, there's
Yeah.
lots of scenarios which lead to this. That's just one
Yeah,
of them.
that is a particularly chaotic scenario, but so many likely scenarios are also very chaotic,
Yeah.
and I think that kind of sums it up really. In that whoever wins is going to have a really difficult job, and I don't think we're suddenly going to have a era of stability.
Of course.
There's
All the likelihoods seem bad, to be quite frank. For the Conservatives, for the country, for Johnson, for Truss, for Sunak, for everyone, all of them are bad.
happy days.
You got most of a pint to drink.
I still
Yeah,
do.
you
Are
still
we
got it.
nearly at the end?
I mean, you just depressed everyone very hard. Do you want to give us some good news? Doesn't even need to be about this. Just lighten the mood
There's a
a
new
little
Doctor Who
bit.
episode on Sunday.
Oh, I said good
I've got a
news.
good fact about Liz Truss.
This is great.
Yeah.
I know this fact. I know what you're going to say.
Yeah.
Do it. It's a great fact. Go on.
Liz Truss is the first British Prime Minister since.
Very
I don't know what camera. I'm not allowed on camera often, so this is new to me. Liz Truss is the first British Prime Minister since 1963 to have to not have had an episode of Doctor Who aired during her premiership.
However,
However,
There is an episode on Sunday.
yeah, so that's going to be ruined.
Yeah.
You can cut that probably.
No,
not a
it's
great
staying
fact.
in.
Yeah.
It's a bad fact, but I also saw it.
I don't even like Doctor Who.
I
Double whammy. For me
wow, double
Yeah.
admission
there.
there.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to say that on the podcast.
Yeah. She's
Bleep
on,
it out.
Yeah.
He says I don't like
Oh,
Doctor
no.
Who, and then big old bleep.
And I don't like bleep.
Yeah. You
Controversial.
don't like the Daleks.
That's true. Yeah.
You're not meant to like them, right? Bad guys. Like plunger.
No, but,
Yeah.
but
How
good,
we-
objectively good villains for a TV show.
We can't.
Sure.
We've got to stop talking about Doctor Who. We've got to get back to.
I think we're done, right?
All right. Okay. Yeah.
I'm getting head shakes from the person editing here.
So, you're editing, mate.
Oh, I am editing.
Don't chuck this on someone else. Okay, so recap. And during my recap, everyone needs to finish because this is the end.
Yeah.
Oh,
Then let me just.
are we
wait.
downing it?
No, wait. Don't, because I need to finish mine, and then you've
And then
got
you
all
can
the
do
time
the
my
recap,
recap. Okay.
You got some work to do.
Are we?
Ben.
What is this on camera? Am I cutting this?
What do you
What's
mean? Is
happening?
this on camera?
He's about to recap.
Look at me, I'm on camera.
This is awful. Can I just apologise to those who aren't watching on YouTube and have no idea of the chaos?
This far. Literally nobody.
Anyone listening on podcast, I apologise.
Okay, so recap on what we've said. We're now letting MPs vote. They've got until Monday. If 100 MPs back an individual, they make it through to the next round. If one person makes it through that, they've then won. They are the new Prime Minister by default. They are coronated. If not, if 2 people make it through, then the Conservative Party membership have roughly the working week
days
to vote. At the end of which, their votes will be counted. We'll have a new Prime Minister. If there's 3, we'll have the whittle situation. We don't have time to get back into whittling, but there'll be some whittling. Regardless, post-whittle, the membership will still get an opportunity to vote. And then still, by the end of next week, at some point, we should have a clear indication of who the new Prime Minister will be via a semi-controversial online vote. The most likely outcome, at least according to our panel of semi-experts, is a Boris versus Rishi second round where members are voting between Boris and Rishi. Now, Rishi has a number of issues on his own. We haven't really run through those in this podcast. We'll be back on beginning of next week. If that is the reality, we'll discuss that in detail. In this episode, we went through Boris Johnson specifically. He's got a mandate. He's got a track record. He's been Prime Minister. However, he's dripping in scandal. He was kicked out once. A bunch of people don't like him. There's some MPs who might resign if he is brought in. So it's not good or bad, but there's risks. There's real risks there. The most likely outcome then is that Rishi and Johnson both make it through. Sunak and Johnson. Why are we mixing first and last names on my piece of paper? Someone's trying to get me in trouble. Sunak and Johnson both get through to the final round, and then there's some kind of fight. And we don't fully know who would win that. It seems Johnson maybe, which would be crazy. It would mean a little Truss blip in the middle of a Johnson premiership.
The Johnson era.
But as the person who makes the thumbnails, I've got so many cutouts of Johnson's face that from a practical perspective, I don't want to be cutting out a new leader.
Yeah. I'm glad that you're putting the country
for 6
first
weeks.
Here.
Yeah. So that's the situation. We'll be back on Monday.
Sober.
And
is this
Tuesday?
Is this the last Truss issues then?
Yes.
Come Tuesday, it'll be
no,
sorry. Yeah.
No.
We're going to call it Truss Issues next week.
Next week, yeah, because
she's still Prime Minister.
We can't name it after, and we won't have a Prime Minister then.
Okay. Yeah. Penultimate then.
Rishi wranglings.
Don't like that.
No. Comment below any ideas.
Yeah.
But no, we don't know. We're going to stick with Truss issues until we have a solid idea of the new Prime Minister, and then we'll maybe consider. But I would argue what's going to happen next week is still a Truss issue.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Yeah. Well said.
Regardless, we'll be back next week. Don't push us any higher up on the podcast charts because
we clearly can't handle 2 pints.
It was a bad idea.
But 2 pints have been sunk by all of us, so it's happened.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Yeah.
We'll see you next week.